Imagine being sold by the one person in the world who is supposed to protect you. Not sold for money, not sold out of hatred, sold out of desperation, wrapped in the kind of quiet shame that a father carries when he has run out of every other option and chosen himself over his own child. Now imagine landing in a foreign country, walking into a house that despises you before you even open your mouth, standing in front of a man so powerful that entire cities move when he decides they should, and the only weapon you have is your mind. No allies, no escape plan, no guarantee that tomorrow looks any different from today. That was me, Adiz Johnson, forensic accountant, Lagos-born, daughter of a man I thought I knew, wife of a man I was told I had to marry, standing in a cold white penthouse in Seoul, wearing my late mother's gold embroidered wrapper, the most precious thing I owned, in a room that smelled like expensive danger and felt like the inside of a trap. I pressed my hands together. I looked at the man across from me, Kwon Junho, feared head of the Kwon syndicate, a name that made grown men drop their phones when it came up in conversation, and I whispered 3 words. "Please be gentle." He turned, he looked at me, 1 second, 2, 3. And then he turned back to the window and said absolutely nothing. That silence was the most frightening thing I had ever experienced, because I understood it immediately. It was not cruelty. Cruelty would have been easier to survive. It was indifference, the particular indifference of a man who has not yet decided whether you matter enough to respond to. I did not know it yet, but that silence was also the beginning of everything. What happened over the next 12 months would unravel a criminal empire built over 11 years, expose a betrayal that went all the way to the roots of a powerful family, bring a hidden woman back from the edges of disappearance, and force me, a woman who had always worked alone, always trusted numbers over people, to learn what it meant to let someone stand beside her. But I am getting ahead of myself. Stay with me, because this story starts exactly where it needs to, in a white room, with a silent man, and 3 words hanging in the air between us like a question that the whole world was waiting to hear the answer to. Before we go any further, I want to know where in the world you are watching this from. Drop your country, your city, your neighborhood in the comments right now. Whether you are in Lagos or London, Accra or Atlanta, Seoul or Sydney, let me know you are here. And if nobody has told you to subscribe to this channel yet, I am telling you now. Hit that button. Turn on your notifications. You will not want to miss a single story. Now let us get into it. The penthouse was white. Everything was white. The walls, the curtains, the sheets stretched tight across the enormous bed like a surface that had never been touched. It felt less like a home and more like a warning. I stood in the center of the room in my mother's hand-embroidered Igbo bridal wrapper, gold and crimson threading catching the low light, and I felt like a flame someone had placed on top of a glacier just to watch it struggle. Junho had walked in ahead of me without offering his hand, without looking back. He moved like a man who had never needed to check whether someone was following him, because nothing in his world ever dared to fall behind. He stopped at the floor-to-ceiling window, hands in his pockets, staring out at soul-glittering 40 floors below us. I stood there and waited. 1 minute. 2. I told myself I was being patient. I was actually being terrified. "Please be gentle," I finally whispered. My voice was steadier than I expected. I was not asking about the man. I was asking about the life, the syndicate, the danger, the crushing weight of the situation I had walked into with my eyes open and my heart screaming. I was asking the universe to go easy on me just this once. Junho turned slowly. He looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. I counted. His face was unreadable, not cold, not cruel, just completely absent of anything I could grab onto. Then he turned back to the window. His assistant, a slim man named Mr. Yoon, stepped forward from the corner where he had been standing so still I had forgotten him entirely. He placed a brown folder on the bed beside me with both hands, bowed slightly, and left the room without a word. I opened the folder. Inside was a 12-page contract. My duties, my permitted movements, my curfew, my silence clause. Everything I could and could not do as the wife of Kwon Junho was written in both Korean and English, neat and precise and utterly humiliating. At the very back, tucked behind the last page like an afterthought, was a yellow sticky note. 4 words in sharp black ink. Do not ask about room 7. I looked up at my husband's back. He had not moved. The Seoul's skyline glittered beneath him like he owned every light in it. I closed the folder, sat on the edge of the bed in my mother's wrapper, and began to read every single page. 3 weeks before that night, I was at my desk in Lagos at 11 in the morning, 3 monitors running, and a cup of jollof-scented steam rising from the mug my colleague Temi had placed beside my keyboard without being asked. I was in the middle of untangling a particularly nasty money laundering case for a shipping conglomerate, the kind of financial mess that made other accountants retire early and made me feel most alive. My Uncle Chitty appeared in my office doorway without knocking. I knew immediately something was wrong. Uncle Chitty was a man who wore confidence the way others wore cologne at all times, in generous amounts. But the man standing in my doorway looked like someone had unplugged him. His shirt was rumpled. His eyes were red. I closed my laptop. Sit down. He told me everything in pieces, the way people tell you news they know will break something. My father, Chief Emeka Johnson, a man I had believed was a quietly retired civil servant living on a professor's pension in Abuja, had been secretly consulting for the financial arm of a Korean criminal organization called the Kwon Network for 6 years. He had been handling their West African money flows, routing funds through ghost companies and dormant accounts with the kind of skill that made my stomach turn, because I recognized the technique. He had learned it from me. I had taught him how to read financial structures years ago, sitting at our kitchen table, thinking it was an innocent lesson between a daughter and her father. 3 weeks ago, he made a catastrophic error. A misrouted $40 million transfer triggered an international financial investigation flag. The kind that brought investigators. The kind that would unravel the entire Kwon West African operation if followed to its end. The syndicate's terms were simple and brutal. The debt was cleared. My father kept his life. In exchange, his daughter, the forensic accountant, the one who could fix the damage from the inside, would marry Kwon Junho and rebuild their compromised financial security. A blood bond. A silence guarantee with a heartbeat. I told Uncle Chitty this was insane. He slid a phone across my desk without a word. On the screen was a live video. My father, sitting in a dim gray room, holding today's newspaper open at the front page, looking directly at the camera with the expression of a man who knew he had destroyed something that could not be rebuilt. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I picked up my own phone and booked the next flight to Seoul. I packed one suitcase. I tucked my mother's gold wrapper between my clothes because something told me I would need a piece of her. I left my office without turning off my monitors. The Kwon family estate sat in the hills above Seoul like a fortress that had learned to dress as a home. Steel and marble arranged in sharp angles, surrounded by grounds that looked tended but never played in. No flowers, no warmth, just precision. I arrived in a black car on a gray Tuesday morning. The driver did not open my door. I opened it myself. The courtyard was empty. No welcome, no staff, no Junho. I stood beside my suitcase for 11 minutes. I counted because counting was the only thing keeping me from walking back down the hill. Then she appeared. Madame Kwon came through the main doors the way weather arrives. You don't see it begin. You just suddenly feel it all around you. She was 60 years old, dressed entirely in white, and she looked at me the way you look at a stain you haven't yet decided how to remove. She spoke in Korean to the housekeeper behind her. My translator, Jai, leaned close to my ear and whispered with a flat professional expression. Tell the African girl the East Wing bathroom is hers. The family does not share bathrooms with guests. I turned to Madame Kwon directly. I had studied on the plane. I opened my mouth and greeted her in formal Korean, not perfect, but deliberate and clear. I told her I was honored to meet her. I watched her face as I spoke. Her eyes flickered, not warmth, the specific annoyance of a woman who had prepared for one version of me and received a different one entirely. Junho was visible at the top of the interior staircase through the open door. He watched the entire exchange without moving or coming down. That night, I went to retrieve my second bag from the car and found both suitcases sitting outside in the courtyard. It had rained since I arrived. My mother's wrapper was in the bag closest to the drain. I picked them both up in silence, carried them inside, and hung the wrapper carefully over the bathroom rail, smoothing every thread of the embroidery with my hands. I told myself I had survived worse. I needed that to be true. The wedding happened 4 days later with the efficiency of a business transaction, which, I reminded myself every hour of that morning, was exactly what it was. A stylist arrived at my door with a rack of gowns, all selected without me. The one chosen was a pale cream Korean hanbok, beautifully made and completely wrong for my complexion. I looked like a photograph printed with the color drained out of it. I asked politely whether I could include a single element of my own culture. A headpiece, anything. The stylist smiled apologetically. The choices had been approved by Madame Kwon. I nodded. I let them dress me. And while they worked, I reached into my travel bag and removed 2 things I had hidden the previous night. My late mother's thin gold chain, which I fastened beneath the hanbok collar where it rested warm against my skin, and the tiny hand-stitched blessing pouch Aunt Ngozi had sewn into my slip before I left Lagos. Invisible to everyone. Present to me. During the ceremony, Madame Kwon leaned across under the guise of adjusting my collar and whispered, "Do not smile too widely. This family does not perform for cameras." I smiled wider. Junho placed the ring on my finger without looking at my face. When the officiant pronounced us married, the applause was polite and brief. Junho's formal gesture, a press of his lips to my cheek lasting less than a second, communicated nothing at all. Across the room, a young woman I hadn't seen before caught my eye. Beautiful, sharp-faced, with a mouth pulled into a careful line. She gave me the smallest, most deliberate shake of her head, a warning I filed away immediately. At the reception, Madame Kwon toasted the Kwon family legacy, her son's strength, and the future of their name. She did not say my name once. She referred to me 3 times as my son's arrangement. I drank my champagne and stored every single word. On my 3rd morning, Mr. Yoon gave me limited access to the syndicate's financial servers, specific folders, specific time windows, enough to begin the work my father's mistake had made necessary. Within 48 hours, I had already found 7 ghost accounts the syndicate's own team had missed for years. I documented them cleanly and built a report. Then my access trail brushed a subfolder tagged KW Room 7. The system threw me out completely and fired an automatic notification to Junho's device. I reopened my session and continued working. 20 minutes later, it happened again. I had not been searching for the folder. I had simply followed the money trail, and the trail went there naturally because money trails always go where the truth lives. The 3rd time it happened, I heard footsteps. Junho appeared in the doorway without his jacket, looking like a man pulled from something important by something more urgent. He stood with one hand on the doorframe. "That folder does not exist for you," he said. "Then why does it appear in 4 separate cash flow reports from 2021? I asked. His jaw tightened, just slightly. He left without answering. That evening, I returned from dinner to find a folded piece of notepaper under my door. The handwriting was careful and small. "Room 7 is not a room. It is a person, and she is still alive." No name at the bottom. I thought immediately of the sharp-eyed woman from the wedding. I pressed the note between the pages of my bedside novel, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, thinking about what kind of person gets named after a room and what kind of house would name her that way. I did not sleep much. My mind works best when the rest of me goes quiet, and that night it worked very hard. By 4 a.m, I had a method. I would follow the money sideways, not directly toward room 7, which had already proven dangerous, but around it, the way water finds a path around stone. Money always moves somewhere. The trail always exists. All I had to do was follow without appearing to. By morning, I had a name. 3 years ago, a Ghanaian British journalist named Ama Darko had traveled to Seoul investigating the Kwon's syndicate's West African financial operation. She had disappeared. Korean press reported she had returned to London voluntarily. Her newspaper marked her unreachable. Her family's missing person report went nowhere. But there was a monthly transfer that didn't match the story of a missing woman. Small, consistent, almost invisible, routed through a Swiss relay into a private account registered under a name that existed in no official registry. A ghost name. A living stipend. Paid every single month without interruption. Someone was keeping Ama Darko alive, quietly and carefully. I looked for the co-signatory on the Swiss relay account, the person whose authorization had established it. The name was Emeka Johnson. My father. I read it 3 times. Then I closed the file and sat completely still with my hands flat on the desk, because if I moved them, I was not certain what they would do next. My father had not stumbled into this world accidentally. He had been trusted enough to co-sign a sensitive, hidden account. He had known what he was sending me into. He had sat in that gray room holding a newspaper, and he had known everything. I walked to the East Wing bathroom. I turned on the tap. I looked at myself in the mirror. I gave myself 4 minutes. I cried everything I needed to cry. Then I washed my face with cold water, dried it, and looked at myself again. You are not a victim, I said out loud. You are an investigator, so investigate. I went back to my desk. Junho took me to a syndicate dinner 2 weeks into the marriage. He said it was time to be seen. He did not ask whether I wanted to be seen. He said it the way you announce whether. I wore my own choice. A deep burgundy encre-print gown I had ordered quietly online the day before, tailored, bold, elegant in a way that needed no justification. I had it pressed and hanging before Junho came to collect me. He looked at it for a moment, then at me. He said nothing. We left. The dining room was everything the estate's formality had promised. Heavy wood, low light, men in dark suits and women in careful elegance, who assessed me the moment I walked in with the speed of people who decide things quickly. Whispers started before I found my seat. During the second course, a large man at the far end of the table, Director Lim, head of the syndicate's Southern Port operations, laughed loudly and then announced in Korean, still laughing, that Junho must have lost a very important bet to end up needing to import help for his accounts. The table laughed, not everyone, but enough. I set down my chopsticks. I reached into my clutch and removed a single folded page I had printed that morning. I leaned forward and slid it across the table to Director Lim. He looked at it. He stopped laughing. It was a detailed breakdown of his personal embezzlement from the Busan port operation. 3 years of quiet skimming. The equivalent of $2.3 million traced to an account registered under his wife's maiden name. It had taken me 2 days to find. I came across this while organizing the general accounts, I said pleasantly. I wanted to flag it privately before it appeared in the formal report. The table went completely silent. Director Lim had turned the specific gray of a man who has just understood something very bad about his very near future. I picked up my chopsticks and continued eating. I did not look at Junho, but I felt the shift in him, the change and the quality of his attention. Not indifference now, something entirely different. Something that felt, for the very first time, like being genuinely seen. The morning after the dinner, Junho came to my office. He stopped in the doorway rather than walking straight in, which I noted, because I had decided to notice everything. He looked at the work spread across my desk, the 3 screens, the printed account maps pinned to the wall in color-coded sequences. How did you find Lim's account so quickly? He asked. It was genuinely curious. He sounded like a man who understood enough about the work to know it should have taken longer. I told him the truth. Embezzlers almost always used a pattern they trusted, and that same pattern left identical fingerprints across different accounts if you knew what to look for. He listened carefully. He asked a follow-up question. I answered. He asked another. We talked for nearly 2 hours. He had inherited the syndicate at 24, days after his father collapsed during a board meeting. No warning, no preparation, no allies, only senior men immediately testing his edges for softness they could exploit. He had built his walls fast and built them thick, not because coldness was his nature, but because warmth had been the first thing his enemies tried to use against him. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "The Ankara was a good choice," he said, and left. That evening, I found my suitcases had been quietly moved from the storage room into the master suite wardrobe. My mother's wrapper had been carefully refolded and placed on top. I stood looking at this for a long time. Then a note appeared under my door. "He has never let anyone get this close to the accounts before. That means you matter now. And in this house, the ones who matter become targets first." Her name was Sora Park. She came to my office 12 days later with 2 cups of coffee and the quiet certainty of someone who had finished deciding something and was ready to act. She closed the door, sat down without being invited, placed 1 cup in front of me. "I've been watching you since the wedding," she said. "I know," I said. She almost smiled. Sora was 2 years into an undercover placement with South Korea's Financial Intelligence Unit, embedded in the syndicate through her father's position, building a case that had been crawling forward too slowly, until I arrived and began moving things from the inside without even intending to. She told me about Darko. Amma was alive, in a private facility 40 minutes outside Seoul. She had uncovered enough about the Kwon Network's international connections to become a target for 3 separate rival organizations. The syndicate had offered her protection. She had accepted, but the arrangement had made her invisible to everyone who might have helped her. My father's co-signature meant he had known all of it. Sora said she needed one thing: the financial architecture proving the connections between the Kwon operation and 2 other criminal networks across West Africa and Southeast Asia. She had the intelligence. I had the money trail. I slid my laptop across the desk. "I've already mapped half of it. Pull up a chair." We worked from 9 in the evening until 3 in the morning. By the time we stopped, we had the skeleton of something that would require both our careers to complete, but it was real and airtight, and more than anyone had managed before. Then I found the thread, running beneath everything. One name, coded, appearing in every single network. A silent partner who had never been publicly named. The account registered under 3 initials, MKO. The same initials as Madame Kwon's maiden name before her marriage. Sora stared at the screen beside me. "She's not just a difficult mother-in-law," she said quietly. "No," I said, "she is the architect." My father called on a Tuesday, on an encrypted line. He sounded smaller than I remembered. The particular weight his voice used to carry, the voice of a man accustomed to filling rooms, was gone. What came through the phone was quieter, older, and afraid of itself. He said he was sorry. I listened without speaking, because silence was useful and I had learned that from the best. Then I asked him directly about Darko. The pause was its own answer, but he filled it slowly, like a man removing something sharp from his own chest. He had known Amma was getting too close to the truth. When the choice came, her location in exchange for his own safety, he chose wrong. He had told himself it wasn't a death sentence. He had told himself she would be protected. People tell themselves many things to make a terrible decision livable. He said he had sent me to Seoul because he genuinely believed Junho was the lesser danger. That inside the syndicate's protection was the only place the larger forces, the people who now knew his daughter's name, could not reach me. I asked him one final question. "Did you know about MKO?" The silence this time was longer, more specific, the silence of a man deciding how much more truth he owes. "Adiz," he finally said, "please be careful." The line went dead. I sat with the phone in my hand, looking at the east wing wall, thinking about the version of my father I had loved for 28 years, and the version sitting somewhere in Seoul with gray walls around him. I decided, quietly and without drama, that they were the same person. That people are not one thing, that this did not make what he did acceptable. that both things could be true at once. I put the phone down. I did not call back. I opened my laptop and kept working. Madame Kwon hosted a luncheon for the syndicate wives on a Thursday. I received word through Jai that it was a family gathering, and my attendance was not expected. I got up at 6 in the morning and cooked. Nigerian coconut rice, my mother's sister's recipe, with toasted coconut, bay leaves, and the specific patience that cannot be rushed. I made enough to fill a wide serving platter. I covered it with a cloth, carried it down the hall to the formal dining room, walked in with a warm smile, placed it in the center of the table, and sat down. The room stopped. Madame Kwon's smile cost her something to produce. She waited until plates were moving and conversation had cautiously restarted, then spoke to the table in Korean at a comfortable volume. Jai translated into my ear. She is consulting a lawyer about the marriage contract, cultural incompatibility clause. The wives murmured. One young woman, barely 25, married to a regional director, caught my eye with genuine sympathy before quickly looking back at her plate. Madame Kwon leaned toward me. Her voice dropped to the register of a private verdict. You have 6 months before my son sees what you truly are, a foreign tool with an expiration date. I looked at her steadily. I picked up my chopsticks. I served myself a portion of the Korean braised beef in front of me, tasted it, and nodded with real appreciation. This is wonderful, I said. I would love the recipe. I will be cooking for this family for a very long time. I smiled the way sunlight smiles at ice, warm, patient, and not afraid of what happens next. That night, returning to my office after dinner, I found a dead crow sitting on my desk. I photographed it, bagged it, noted the time and date in the file I had been keeping since my second day in this house. Then I disposed of it and cleaned the desk surface carefully. Everything was evidence. Everything went in the file. Sora found me late on a Friday evening with something she had not been looking for. Payments were leaving a dormant syndicate account. Not large, not obvious, just steady, running for 11 years to a genetics laboratory in Zurich. It took us 3 hours to understand why. Junho's father had been married before Madame Kwon, a first wife, quiet and brief, whose name had been scrubbed from every official family record. That marriage had produced a son, a half-brother Junho had been told did not exist. The payments were funding that son, quietly, patiently, for over a decade. I sat back and looked at the timeline. Then I thought about MKO, about Madame Kwon's initials threaded through every criminal network we had mapped, about the same 11-year span. She had known about the half-brother and had been funding him herself, not out of guilt, not out of love, but as a contingency. A controlled replacement, ready to install when Junho became inconvenient. Her own son had always been meant to be temporary. I went looking for Junho that night and found him in a dim room I hadn't entered before, sitting in a chair by the window, holding a photograph. He didn't hide it when he heard me. He held it out. A woman I didn't recognize, soft-faced, intelligent eyes. My father's first wife, he said. I found this when I was 19. I was told she was nobody. I sat across from him. She was somebody, I said quietly, and I think you already know what I'm about to tell you. We talked until past midnight. I told him everything. I watched it move through him, shock, grief, then the cold reorganization of a man who turns pain into decision rather than collapse. By the end, he was completely still. You are the first person in this house who has ever told me the truth, he said. Then let's make sure it counts, I said. Madame Kwon made her most dangerous move on a Saturday evening, dressed as a peace offering. For the first time, she insisted I sit at the head table for a formal family dinner. She had Jai tell me she wished to demonstrate unity. She wore an expression of effortful warmth that must have been exhausting to maintain. I sat down. I remained completely alert. Halfway through the second course, a man I didn't recognize entered and settled into an empty chair across from me with a recorder visible on his phone screen and the practiced ease of a journalist who has done this before. His questions started pleasantly: my background, my career in Lagos, then sharpened. Were you aware of any overseas accounts connected to your father before your marriage? The table went quiet. Madame Kwon's satisfaction radiated from my left like heat. She had invited a journalist to a private dinner to publicly tie my name to my father's crimes. It would give Junho both legal grounds and social pressure to dissolve the marriage contract. Clean, precise, perfectly timed. I set down my chopsticks. I looked at the journalist. Then I opened my clutch and removed the item I had carried every day for a week without knowing exactly when I would need it. A USB drive. I placed it in the center of the table. I am very glad you are here, I said, because I have a much more interesting story for you. I looked past the journalist directly at Madame Kwon. The name at the top of the 11-year account is not my father's, I said. It is hers. The dinner collapsed like a building, with its foundations removed. Madame Kwon knocked her wine glass. She recovered quickly. She was not a woman who permitted visible panic, but the glass was already tipped, the wine spreading, and the journalist was looking between us with the sharp alertness of someone who has just realized they are inside something much larger than a family dispute. Junho stood. His voice dropped to the register that made rooms go completely still. He told the journalist the evening was over. He looked at his mother. She looked back with the readiness of a woman prepared to fight her way out of anything. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since I arrived in Seoul, his eyes were fully open, like a door that had finally chosen to unlock. He picked up the USB drive from the table. Madame Kwon reached for his arm. Junho, she fabricated. He stepped back from her touch, one single quiet step. He told the room dinner was finished. We sat together in his study afterward. He plugged in the drive and we went through it in silence, side by side. Document after document, the MKO accounts, the 11-year payment structure, the half-brothers funding timeline, the coded transfers running through 3 criminal networks across 2 continents. The silence between us was not the first kind, not indifference, not distance. It was the silence of 2 people absorbing something enormous together. Madame Kwon had been the invisible hand beneath everything. She had positioned Junho as a placeholder, built a rival heir in secret, and maintained connections across 3 criminal networks that the syndicate itself did not know were linked, because they all ran through her maiden name. Junho sat back in his chair. For one moment his face showed everything, the grief, the anger, and beneath both of those, the specific pain of a child discovering that the person who was supposed to protect him had been the danger all along. I reached across and put my hand over his. He did not move away. His name was Kwon Taemin. He arrived 3 days later, driving himself, walking through the front door with the ease of someone who had imagined doing exactly this for a very long time. Tall, surface charming, dangerous in an entirely different register from Junho. He introduced himself to me with a smile that occupied only the lower half of his face. The African wife. My mother told me you were clever. I thought she was being unkind to you both. He sat with Junho for an hour in the formal reception room, speaking about the past with great sadness and apparent goodwill. In the hallway near the east wing, he found me alone. The smile remained, but the quality changed entirely. You should take your father and leave Korea, he said, pleasantly and quietly, in a voice that had never contained warmth. This is a family matter. You were brought here to fix numbers. The numbers are fixed. There is no role for you in what comes next. I tilted my head slightly. Everything in this house has something to do with me now, I said. I am family. He looked at me for a moment, the specific look of someone recalculating, and then walked away. That night, Sora pressed a piece of paper into my hand in the kitchen. Through her FIU contacts, she had dug into Taemin's history. He was a primary suspect in the disappearance of 2 syndicate members who had independently gotten too close to the MKO account. 3 years apart, 2 different territories, 2 cases never resolved, 2 men never seen again. Taemin was not just ambitious. He removed obstacles. I looked at the paper, then at Sora, and understood with complete clarity that the most dangerous phase of all of this was only just beginning. I woke on a Wednesday morning to Mr. Yoon standing in my office doorway with an expression I had not seen on him before, careful and uncomfortable, like a man delivering news he hadn't chosen to carry. Someone had filed an internal security report. My login credentials had been used at 3 in the morning to access and compress a folder of sensitive account records and transfer them to an external server. I had been asleep at 3 in the morning. I told Mr. Yoon this. He nodded. He looked like he believed me. He said the matter would go to the senior inner circle. An hour later, I sat in Junho's conference room at a table with 4 syndicate directors. Junho at the head. Taemin 2 seats away, expression arranged into devastated concern. He leaned forward when the evidence was presented and spoke quietly about the difficulty of extending trust across cultural boundaries, and how perhaps they had all moved too quickly. The directors murmured agreement. Junho looked at me and asked me to explain. I looked at Junho and said what I knew to be true. You already know I didn't do this. The question is whether you are willing to find out who did. He said nothing. I stood, excused myself, and walked out. That night, Sora's room was empty, professionally cleared, not abandoned, erased. I contacted her handler through the emergency back channel she had given me in our first meeting. He told me her cover had been blown. She had been pulled from the field. Then, Miss Johnson, Sora told us you have the full financial architecture. If anything happens to her, you are the case now. I was completely alone. I searched Sora's room carefully and found what she had left, a tiny memory card taped flat under the desk drawer. One video file. Security footage, the server room, timestamp 2:58 in the morning. Taemin, sitting at a terminal, typing steadily, my name on the login screen in front of him. I made my decision before sunrise. I was done waiting, done being strategic in silence while Taemin moved freely through the house, and my name sat on a false report, and my only ally had been pulled out of reach. I copied the memory card 3 times. One copy went encrypted to Sora's handler at the FIU, marked urgent. One copy went to a journalist in Lagos I had worked with twice before and trusted with important things. I included a 30-page summary of the MKO architecture and a note telling her to use her judgment. One copy went to a law firm in London I had used on an international case the year before. I sent a sealed instruction letter. In the event of my death, my disappearance, or the disappearance of my father, publish everything. Then I walked to Madame Kwon's private sitting room and opened the door without knocking. She looked up from her chair with the immediate fury of a woman whose spaces had never been entered uninvited. I closed the door. I sat across from her without being invited. I folded my hands in my lap and spoke quietly without theater. I know about MKO, I know about Taemin and the 11-year fund and every network it connects to. 3 people outside this country received copies of the complete documentation 20 minutes ago. If anything happens to me, my father, or anyone I care about, every account, every name, every transaction, including yours, goes simultaneously to the press and to international law enforcement. I let that settle. Madame Kwon's face moved through fury, calculation, and then, for one unguarded moment, real fear. Not of me specifically, of what I had already set in motion and could no longer be stopped by removing me from the picture. I am not asking for your love, I said. I am not asking for your respect. I am telling you the rules have changed. I stood up and left the door open behind me. Junho found me in the courtyard that night, the same courtyard where my luggage had sat in the rain on my first evening. I had come outside because I needed air and sky and space without walls. He stood in front of me without his jacket, hands at his sides, looking at me with an expression I had not seen before, open and effortful, like a man doing something difficult because it was right. He told me he had known I didn't leak the files almost immediately. He had tasked Mr. Yoon with pulling the server room footage the same day the report was filed. He had seen Tiemann on the recording within hours of the accusation. I absorbed this. You said nothing, I said. I needed to understand the full scale of what my mother built before I moved against her, he said. Because once I start, I cannot stop in the middle. I needed to be completely certain. I looked at him in the dark. If I had been Korean, if I had looked like everyone else in this house, would it still have taken you that long? He held my eyes. He did not answer quickly. A fast answer to that question would have been a lie, and we both knew it. No, he finally said. It would have taken me an hour, and that is something I have to sit with honestly. He said it plainly and without excuse, like a man who had looked at something uncomfortable about himself and chosen not to look away from it. Something shifted in my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of something that could become it. Then let's finish this, I said. Together, no more waiting. For the first time since I arrived in Seoul, the silence between us felt like something shared rather than something that separated us. Tiemann moved within 48 hours. He contacted the 3 most senior regional directors privately and called an emergency leadership review, citing concerns about Junho's judgment being compromised by a foreign spouse with undisclosed connections to international investigations. He framed it in procedural language, not a coup, just a responsible question raised by a concerned family member. 3 directors had agreed to attend before Junho was even notified. The morning of the meeting, Junho and I arrived at the syndicate boardroom together. I wore deep burgundy. He wore the calm of a man who has made his decision and is not afraid of what waits on the other side of it. Tiemann was already seated at the head of the table. He looked at us both with practiced regret. This doesn't have to be ugly. Walk away, Junho. Take your wife. Live quietly somewhere. I have no interest in causing you pain. Junho pulled out my chair. Then he took his own seat and looked at Tiemann with complete steadiness. My wife has a presentation, he said. I stood at the head of that boardroom table, and I thought of my mother. I thought of her gold wrapper and her embroidered threads and Aunt Ngozie's blessing pouch against my skin, and I thought of what she used to say when I was small and afraid. You are enough for every room you walk into. I began. I took them through the full financial map, methodically, completely, the way you build something that cannot be argued with. The MKO accounts and their 11-year history. Every territory they touched. Every director in that room whose operations had been quietly skimmed to build Tiemann's resources without their knowledge. I showed them the funding timeline, the network architecture, the coded transfers across 3 continents. Then I showed them the account designed to pay off the directors who cooperated with the transition. And the separate account, the one earmarked for the 3 directors most likely to resist. It was not a payment account. Director Lim leaned forward slowly and asked to see the source data. I handed him a tablet. He scrolled for 2 silent minutes. Then he set it down and looked at Tiemann. You plan to have me removed, he said. Tiemann stood. His composure left him all at once, not slipping but dropped entirely. He raised his voice. Called me a foreign manipulator, a weapon Junho was using to destroy his own family. Said my father's crimes invalidated everything I had produced. I waited until the room was quiet. You used my login credentials to access the server at 2:58 in the morning, I said. The biometric readers in the server room recorded a different person's data. Would you like me to show that as well? The vote was unanimous. Madame Kwon was brought to the boardroom the following morning. She walked in with her composure intact and her white dress immaculate, and I thought not for the first time that she was genuinely formidable. The kind of woman who, in a different life and a different set of choices, might have been someone I admired without reservation. She chose offense. She wept briefly and precisely, claiming she had been manipulated by Tiemann, that her role had been misrepresented, that a mother's love had been exploited by people around her. It was a practiced and convincing performance. When it was finished, I slid a single document across the table, the full accounting of MKO, countersigned by 3 directors and a legal notary. You built this, I said. Every account, every network connection, every payment. Over 11 years in this house, running this family, you built something beneath all of it that none of them knew existed. She looked at her son for rescue. Junho looked back. His face was not cold. It was sadder than cold, the sadness of a man who has finished grieving something and arrived at what comes after. You told me my whole life that outsiders could not be trusted, he said quietly. You were the one I should have been watching. Junho did not send her to prison. He cut every financial connection, removed her name from every account, and transferred her to the family's old countryside estate, a comfortable house, a modest allowance, and total permanent distance from every room where power lived. Not dramatic punishment, but for a woman who had lived entirely on power, irrelevance was the cruelest possible outcome. I watched her leave without triumph, just the quiet particular feeling of a door closing on something that had been open far too long. Sora resurfaced 10 days later in civilian clothes, no longer undercover, holding 2 cups of coffee exactly the way she had on our very first morning together. She grinned when she saw me, the most open expression I had ever seen on her face. Her cover had been blown by a mole within the FIU, since identified and suspended. She was fine, officially on record, and ready to finish what we started. We drove together to the private facility outside the city on a gray Tuesday morning. 40 minutes. Neither of us said much. It felt like the final chapter of a very long book, and I didn't want to rush the ending. Amadarko was sitting by the window of a small, comfortable room when we arrived. 41 years old, sharply beautiful, with the specific alert stillness of someone who has spent a long time thinking and is ready to stop waiting. She looked at me carefully. You walked into the dragon's house, she said, and audited your way out. I laughed for the first time in months. It surprised me how full it sounded. We sat together for 6 hours. She had been writing every network connection, every name, every transaction she had witnessed, documented with the discipline of a journalist who knew the story was bigger than her own safety. When I showed her our financial map, she pulled out her own documents. They matched, column for column and name for name. Together it was complete, airtight, undeniable. Sora submitted the full package to the FIU the next morning. I submitted the financial architecture to the International Financial Crimes Unit simultaneously. Amma gave her testimony formally and in full. My father's name was in every document. I did not remove it. He came to Seoul 2 weeks later. We met in a small cafe near the harbor, a neutral place, which was what I needed. He looked like a man who had spent a long time accounting for himself, which is different from a man who has simply given up. He told me he was cooperating fully with investigators. He had a lawyer. He had made his statement voluntarily and completely. He said this without asking for credit, just as information, the way you give someone the honest status of something that belongs to both of you. Then he was quiet and waited for me. I told him I did not forgive him yet, that this was not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of a much longer one, and he needed to understand that distinction clearly. I told him his name was in the documents because truth was not something I was willing to apply selectively, even when it hurt me. He nodded. He did not argue or make excuses. He looked like a man who had expected exactly this and had decided it was fair. I told him one more thing. You traded me to protect yourself. I walked into that house and protected myself. I need you to understand the difference between those two things and what it cost me before we start building whatever comes next between us. He said, I understand, I am sorry. Both of those things are completely true. I paid for the coffee. I hugged him, not the full hug of a daughter who has forgotten, but a real one, brief and honest. The kind that says, you are still my father and this is not finished between us, and I am choosing not to give up on you yet. He watched the car from the curb as I walked back to Junho, who was waiting because I had chosen to bring him, which was itself a kind of answer to a question I had been carrying for months. The restructuring took 4 months. Junho dissolved the underground operations systematically, beginning with the West African financial arm, the piece my father's mistake had originally cracked open, and working outward from there. The syndicate's legitimate front businesses were consolidated into a registered holding company, KJ Global Partners. Licensed, audited by an external firm I selected myself after confirming none of them had any previous connection to the Kwon network. He asked me to be Chief Strategy Officer. I took 3 days to decide, not from uncertainty, but because I needed to be sure I was saying yes for the right reasons. Not because I owed him anything. Not because I lacked alternatives. Because I was genuinely skilled at this work. Because the company needed someone who understood what it had come from and was committed to making sure it never went back, and because I wanted to. I said yes. At the inner circle meeting, I laid out the new structure in front of the remaining directors. A legal company, legitimate contracts, shareholder agreements with built-in compliance. They could sign and become part of what we were building, or I would submit the evidence of their individual activities to the authorities by end of business that day. Director Lim signed first. The others followed within the hour. Teeman was formally expelled and handed to law enforcement with a complete evidence package. He did not fight it. Madame Kwon, in her countryside house, received news of the restructuring by telephone. The housekeeper told Mr. Yoon that she had gone very quiet after the call and had not spoken for the rest of the day. I thought about her occasionally, not with anger, with something more like understanding. She had built so much and aimed every piece of it in the wrong direction. A year after the night, I stood in that white penthouse in my mother's gold wrapper and whispered 3 words to a man who said nothing back. Jun-ho took me out to the balcony of our new headquarters. The KJ Global building was the tallest in that district of Seoul, clean glass and straight lines, with our names on the lobby directory and a view that stretched until the city seemed to have no edges at all. He handed me a document. Not a contract. The language was immediately different, no silence clauses, no restrictions, no sticky notes. A real marriage certificate, properly filed. 2 names chosen freely. I want to do this again, he said. The right way, because I choose to, not because any contract requires it. I held the certificate and looked at him. The man who had stood at a window on our wedding night and said absolutely nothing, who had taken too long to choose me, and then, when he finally did, had chosen completely and without reservation. Yes, I said, simply, because simple was what was true. We held a second ceremony in Enugu. My family compound, full of noise and color, and the deep familiar warmth of a place that had always known exactly who I was. Jun-ho wore traditional Ibo attire his aunties had helped him choose on a video call, and he did not look uncomfortable once. He danced badly at the reception and laughed at himself with a fullness I had never seen in Seoul, and his laugh was the best thing in the room. Sora was there, toasting us in both languages and getting them mixed up without caring. Ama Darko was there, a published author now, her exposé shortlisted for 2 international awards, her name restored to everything it had once been taken from. My father sat at the edge of the celebration, quieter than he used to be, carrying his new humility carefully. I had invited him because I was still choosing not to give up on him, and that choice belonged entirely to me. On the flight back to Seoul, I rested my head against the window and watched the clouds far below and thought about the night I had first whispered, "Please be gentle." I had been asking the life to go easy on me, to show mercy, to be kinder than the situation suggested it would be. The life had not been gentle, not even close. It had been harder than anything I had ever faced, more complicated than any financial case I had ever untangled, more painful than I had known how to prepare for. It had required every skill I possessed, every stubborn thread of my mother's daughter that I carried inside me, and several things I had not known I was capable of until the moment I needed them. And I had been exactly enough. I opened my laptop. There was already a new file waiting, a corporation in Singapore with accounts that did not balance the way they should, a trail going somewhere someone did not want followed. I cracked my knuckles. The African bride had figured out who she was, and she was just getting started. Before this story closes, I want to leave you with something real, something you can carry beyond this screen. Adi's story is fiction, but everything it is built on is true. The first truth is this: the most dangerous weapon any person can carry into an unfair situation is a skill so sharp that no one can take it from them. Adiz did not survive because she was lucky, or because the right person finally chose to protect her. She survived because she had spent years building something inside herself: discipline, knowledge, precision, that could not be confiscated at the door. Whatever your field is, whatever your gift is, build it. Sharpen it. Own it so completely that no room you walk into can make you feel like you do not belong there. The second truth is about silence. Not every silence is emptiness. Sometimes silence is a wall built out of old wounds, inherited fear, and years of learning that openness gets punished. Junho's silence was not indifference, it was armor. Before you decide that a person does not care, it is worth asking whether they have simply never been shown that caring is safe. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it explains it, and understanding something is different from excusing it. The third truth is about betrayal from the people we love most. Adiz's father failed her, not because he was evil, but because he was afraid, and in his fear he made choices that cost his daughter enormously. This happens in real families, in real relationships, all the time. The question Adiz had to answer, and the question many of us face, is not whether to pretend the betrayal didn't happen, but whether love is large enough to hold both the wound and the person who caused it, and what kind of distance is necessary while you figure that out. The fourth truth is about dignity in hostile spaces. Every humiliation Madame Kwon delivered was designed to make Adiz feel like a visitor who did not belong. And Adiz's response every single time was the same: not rage, not tears, but calm and grounded presence. Taking the plate, wearing the ankara, smiling wider when told not to smile. Dignity under pressure is not weakness. It is the most disciplined and powerful thing a person can practice. The people who try hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones most threatened by the space you naturally occupy. The fifth truth is the most important one. Adiz did not transform the Kwon syndicate by becoming someone else. She transformed it by being completely and unapologetically herself. Her training, her culture, her mother's gold wrapper, her Ibo blessings, her Lagos instincts, her refusal to become quieter or smaller in a house that kept asking her to. The most radical thing she did was remain whole in a place designed to fragment her. Whatever room you are walking into, whatever house has left your bags in the rain, whatever table has forgotten to set a place for you, walk in anyway. Carry your skills, your culture, your truth, and your mother's gold threads if you have them. Sit down without being invited. And remember that the most powerful version of you is not the version that adapts to survive, but the version that refuses to disappear. You were always enough for the room. You just had to stay long enough to prove it. And that is the story of Adiz Johnson, the African bride who walked into silence and answered it with everything she had. Now I want to hear from you. Drop an honest review of this story in the comments right now. Did it grip you from the first line? Which moment hit you hardest? Was it the crow on the desk, the dead silence of that wedding night, the boardroom, or the moment Junho finally said, "I'm sorry," without looking away? Tell me the scene that stayed with you, because that is the one that means something. And I want to know where in the world you are watching this. Drop your country, your city, wherever you are sitting right now as these words land. Whether you are in Port Harcourt or Paris, Nairobi or New York, Kumasi or Seoul itself, let me see you in those comments. If you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because the next story is already being built, and it is going to pull you in even deeper than this one did. Thank you for watching until the very last word. That means everything. I will see you in the next one.